Hello and welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Maury of Andrea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast where I try my best to answer some of your questions. I've already got some fiber sticking to my lips, so we are off to a great start. So as you can tell, this is a day or two late. I'm hoping that this will get posted today. It's Saturday. Might come out tomorrow. I'm not going to say too much here. I know that we tend to have a lot of ages, either tuning in or in the room, but there were some sad events here in Maine this week, and we took a couple of days with our family during all of that. So this is coming out a little bit late, and along with some other unexpected circumstances that popped up this week. It's been a week, but it is so lovely to be with you here today. So thanks for tuning in, even a day or two late. Today I am wearing my rad plaid cowl, and two reasons. One, we are having our last hurrah to the warm weather today here in Portland. It is going to be like 75 degrees, which is actually really exciting because, as I told you, darn it, I had grabbed some and it's down in my room. I had told you all that I was hoping to maybe buy my first fleece at Rhinebeck this past weekend, and I did. So me and my very good friend Kate Berge from Spin Cycle Yarns decided we found this gorgeous dark brown with a little bit of gray merino Corriedale fleece. And so we bought it, we're gonna split it. And because I saw in the weather that we were gonna have this last sunny, very warm day, it gets really hot on our porch even in like 70 degrees. So anyways, I busted my little booty and washed my fleece, and now it is all laying out on my porch to dry. And I am really excited. And it was just the kind of meditative crafting that I needed. So I wanted to show you a couple locks from it, and it's in my pocket downstairs. Anyways, back to why I'm wearing the red plaid cowl. So it's gonna be really warm today. So I am in short sleeves. It is gonna be about 75 degrees, which I swear it is warmer in Maine in the sun than it was in Michigan. It might be mid 60s, mid 70s, but if you're in direct sunlight, it feels like the high 80s. Maybe that's just me, and then in the shade, you'll need a sweater. So anyways, the sun I feel like is quite strong here. And so I could not put on too heavy of a knit, hence the cowl. But also at Rhinebeck, I had a number of people say to me, oh, this would be so fun as a cowl. And I was like, there is one. It's just under a different name. So the rad plaid cowl was actually my first playing with this fun stitch pattern that I then went on to use for the tessellated vest and pullover. So if you wanted to check out a cowl version, maybe see how you feel about that stitch pattern, this is one of my favorite. I basically have two go-to styles for a cowl. Either the shift cowl kind of style, that's a little triangle, it looks like a triangle shawl, but it's a cowl, or this style, which is like a little Mobius. It's a tube you knit, you twist once, and then you somehow join the two ends together. You can do it with seaming, you can graft your stitches, lots of different options. So this is a great way to kind of play with a stitch pattern and try it out because you just knit a big old tube of it. So yeah, that is the rad plaid cowl. I will of course link it below. And tomorrow, fall and winter on its heels are coming for us. It's gonna drop by about 30 degrees. So I'm ready for snuggle time tomorrow. And hopefully throughout the coming months, I'm gonna slowly start processing the fleece that I washed. So I will show it to you when I actually remember to bring some up here. All right. There was so much that I wanted to chat about today, and let's hope I remember it. Sometimes when I hit record, I feel like my mind just goes blank, and we just have to go with the flow and see what happens. So let's jump into some questions. Oh, by the way, I used my hand spun in the shawl. So the darkest color, that's my hand spun, which I spun out of some roving from Hello Yarn and a bat from Artifacts of Appreciation. And then I applied those together. And then there is also some lovely Surrey alpaca Kumo from La Bien-Aimée. And then there's a single ply, really woolly farm yarn from Hinterland Farms. And that is, I believe, called Dusk is the name of that one. You can find it all on the pattern page, but I always like to give a shout out to the beautiful yarns that are in the pattern. All right, let's jump into some questions. So question number 1 is, when knitting your socks, do you use double pointeds or shorties? I'm ready to buy new sets. My old bamboo DPNs are bent or broken, trying to figure out what kind would be best. So I don't actually do either. I'm a magic looper. I love magic loop. It is my go-to. I actually got into this conversation with one of my housemates during Rhinebeck weekend who does not like magic loop. And so we were just chatting about like, oh, that's why I love it. Oh, that's why I don't. And her go-to is 2 circulars. So there are a lot of options. You might not even need to buy something new if you do have circular needles, especially if you have a interchangeable set. Although for socks, you might need some smaller sizes than what comes in the interchangeable set. So like I have, it's actually the only fixed needles I still have. I've gifted away pretty much all my other fixed circular needles. But the ones I do still have is I have 2 sets of 0s and 2 sets of 1s. I might even have 2 sets of 2s. And that's because I used to do 2 circular needles to work in the round, which think of it as working with double pointeds, but instead of having 4 to 5 short needles, you have a cord in between those needle tips and you just use 2 of them. So that can be a really nice way to do it. For me, magic loop is the simpler version of that because I only need 1 needle and it feels a little less fiddly for me, but I do think that the 2 circulars is a really nice option. Shorties, for me, are a little pushing it on size for socks. I will use them for sleeves if I am doing color work or something else that is fiddly that I don't want to deal with a bunch of jumps. So like moving between double pointeds, even having 2 gaps because of my magic loop. By using the shorties, you have that complete circle. So there's a less chance of laddering or the fiddly stuff when you've got a float going across that jump of your 2 needles, when you're moving from one needle to the next. I like to avoid that if I can because I just find that my work tends to be neater. So that's when I would use a shorty. Otherwise, they're not the most comfortable for my hands. I have kind of large hands. I have really long fingers and I don't know, there's something about those little cords. I do think they're great and I have friends who love them. They were a game changer for them. But for me, they're kind of like, I use it as a tool to make my life easier when they make my life easier. For socks, that's not really the case for me. And double pointeds, I do love for the fact that I remember the first time I ever used them, I felt like a superhero. I was like, do you see what I'm doing? This looks so complicated and crazy and look at me go. So I love double pointeds for that reason. I also love their simplicity. I'm doing this because my set of double pointeds is right here. So all that to say, it is so personal preference and whatever works best for you. I also know a lot of people who like the flexi needles that are like a DPN, but they're flexible. So they're almost like really short. You could probably use the shorties like those, couldn't you? Anyways, so yeah, it's really up to you. Maybe try a couple different things out and just see what works best for you. You know, you could invest in 1 long needle in the size you usually use for socks and see how you feel about magic loop. Is that too finicky for you? Maybe you like this, maybe you like that, and just kind of go with whatever you're going to use the most. Because what I have found for me is there are times where I'm like, ooh, I want to give that a try. And I go get the thing. And then we tend to want the comfort. We tend to like what we know in our crafts, the tools that already feel good in our hands that we're used to using. So it can be really fun to learn a new technique, but before investing in like a bunch of sets of DPNs or whatever it is, it's nice to kind of try them out and make sure, but is that for you? Because sometimes it's just not, and that's okay. All right. Next question. I will say, generally the needles I use are Chow. Those just happen to be what feels best for me. So those are what I generally use for all my knitting, including socks. My daughter is learning to spin, and I bought some of the confetti fiber for her. This person is talking about the new fun confetti fiber from La Bien-Aimée. Do you have any tips for her since you spun up the same fiber? Getting consistency is hard with the bits of pieces in the fiber. Thank you. I look forward to your post. Oh, thank you. Okay, so here's my skein I spun up with that confetti. And I loved spinning this. I will say, I totally understand what you're saying. It has all these amazing tweedy blips in it, which is what makes it so fun. So my suggestion would be, I have a couple things. So one, if it is causing frustration and you said your daughter is learning to spin, she might want to save that confetti after doing some more practice spins to get more comfortable. So I was so lucky. There are so many amazing people in the spinning community. I mean, I am talking some of the most generous, kind, just amazing people. I have had people be so generous with information and tips. And even early on, one of my social media friends who I met thanks to Instagram and Ravelry and things like that sent me a couple things to help keep me going on my spinning journey. I had learned, and I think that there is that little bit of waffle for some of us from when you learn to when you really dive in. And it's kind of that, is this for me? Can I do this? Is it too hard? Am I not good at it? You know, it's that kind of place of discomfort when you're learning a new thing. And so this person, Katrina Reading, sent me just a little care package. She was like, I would love to send you a couple things. And one of the things she sent me was some Polworth. And again, this is somebody who's so generous with information and tips. And it really helped me go from learning to spin to loving spinning. So there are a couple fibers that I think you could jump into and spin before something that has bits in it to kind of boost that confidence so that you feel more comfortable with consistency. So I did Polworth. I loved it. One of the things I love about Polworth is it really poofs up nice after you wash your skein, and it can help hide some of those inconsistencies. Some people also love Corriedale when they're first getting going. It has a nice staple length. And I've just heard a lot of people recommend that to beginners. This actually, I'm sure has some Corriedale in it now that I'm thinking about it. I don't have my notes right here on it, but, so then here's the other thing. The more plies you have, the more you will hide potentially your inconsistencies. So I did a 3-ply. And I feel like I've gotten fairly consistent over my years of spinning. I'm 4 years in now, about 3.5. But my 3-ply is always gonna look a little more consistent than my 2-ply, and that's just because there's that extra ply in there to help even out maybe the thick and thin of the different spots as those 3 different plies wind together. So I recommend maybe trying out a 3-ply. And also, I think sometimes it's really easy to worry about consistency, but when you go to use that yarn, a lot of times that inconsistency is not as blaringly obvious as you think it's going to be. Unless you're really going from like hair thin to all of a sudden a big plump, you know, like we kind of do in the beginning. But otherwise, it's amazing how even it can look once you knit it up, even if there's some inconsistency happening there. And I also like to think about it as that's the beauty of making it with our hands. A machine didn't do this, so it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be part of me. It's an extension of what I can do and what I did with my hands. And so having that bit of inconsistency in there, I think is just a beautiful nod to being human. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, there is just something about working with hand spun yarn that's unlike anything else. It's so magical because it's so full of the energy we put into it. And so it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be super consistent, but I definitely understand the goals of wanting it to be more consistent and things like that. So don't be afraid to hit pause on that special fiber, go spin up some kind of easy to spin fiber, and then come back to that. And don't overthink the blips too much. I mean, that's something that I like to think about too, is in something like this that has those tweedy chunks in it, it's meant to turn it into a textured yarn. So I try not to overthink that as I'm spinning those singles, because you are gonna have some bloop as they come across, and that's totally fine and good, and is actually what makes that yarn so lovely in the end. So I hope that your daughter really enjoys the journey that is spinning, because ooh, I love it. Question number 3. I'm super curious how you decide which wheel or spindle to use for which spinning project. Is it whichever one has empty bobbins or spindle, or do certain wheels or spindles handle certain fibers projects better than others? So 100%, I think that there are reasons to use certain tools to create what we want. And I am definitely pro let the tool do the work instead of trying to make our body do the work when we're creating things, whether it's knitting, spinning, whatever it may be. Let's use our tools to the best of our abilities to kind of put less strain on our bodies. So for me, as far as spindles go, let's start there. So spindles, the main thing I would think about is the weight of the spindle. The heavier the spindle, the thicker the yarn you're gonna spin. The lighter the spindle, the thinner. You're also going to get more twist out of a light spindle. Am I saying that right? No, I'm not. Now I feel like it's the heavier spindle that's going to give you more twist. It's going to keep spinning longer than a light spindle, right? There's actually some great blog posts about how to choose spindles. So I'm going to, you know what's so funny is anytime I search spindles, a lot of not fiber things come up. It's more, they're talking about like, I think woodworking and also mechanics. It's not kind of, they're not talking about spinning yarn. I would choose spindles for spinning yarn. Okay. So I definitely know that the weight part is right. The lighter the spindle, the finer the yarn, the heavier the spindle, the thicker the yarn. But now I'm doubting myself on the spin. I feel like it is the heavier the spindle, the longer it will spin for. I think that's true because even as you start to load up your spindle with fiber as you're spinning it, it spins longer and longer and longer the heavier it gets. So I think I'm remembering it right. But I did find, because when I was first getting into spindle spinning, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I did look up some guides on how to pick a spindle and things like that. So for me, the easiest way is definitely the like fine yarn, light spindle, heavy yarn, heavy spindle, thick yarn, heavy spindle, kind of going that way with spindles. But there are other things to think about. I also, that was my other exciting Rhinebeck find, was I got a supported spindle. It's hard. I find it so challenging. It's so awkward. support for my hands. So somebody tell me that I just need to keep going and it's gonna get better and easier. I can be y'all's cheerleader all day long for wheel spinning and even drop spindle spinning, but I watch these spinners that I look up to so much on like Instagram, and they all have these videos of them relaxing with their little bowl and their little sported spindle, and they show these beautiful loaded up spindles full of fiber, and I'm like, I want to do it. So I am trying, but y'all, it's hard. It is not natural for me. I also I don't know which hand to do which with. Anyways, that is what I'm trying to learn right now, but I'm totally going on a different tangent. But so don't even ask me about supported spindles because I got nothing right now, except for that I'm trying to learn. But now let's talk wheels. So we discussed the whole bobbin thing for wheels. So for me, I have a number of wheels. I have told y'all that I talked about it in a previous episode. Maybe if I'm clever, I'll remember which episode. Here, I'm gonna just write spindle link so I don't forget. Previous wheel link so I don't forget. Okay, so what led me to buy another wheel was when I learned long draw. So when I learned to spin long draw, to spin woolen, I was doing it. My very first wheel was a matchless, shacked matchless, and I love that wheel. You can do so much on that wheel. There is so much customization that can happen with that wheel. Things I'm still learning, like holy smokes, this wheel can do everything. But it's a captain style wheel. And as I'm getting older, I hit 40 this summer, I have just found that for me personally, sitting in front of a wheel that's a captain style wheel, that it's all upright in front of you, I kept turning to do long draw like this, and it was really putting some stress on my lower back. It just was not working for me. So that's when I was like, okay, is there a way that I can spin long draw in a much more comfortable way? Now, there are plenty of people who spin long draw on a captain style wheel, so definitely not saying you can't do that. But for me, it just wasn't working very well. So I went to my local Port Fiber and had my good pal Casey help me try out a Saxony style wheel, which is like the Cinderella wheel. So that is sideways. You've got the big drive wheel here, the orifice and stuff over here. And that has helped me a lot when I'm spinning long draw, because I can spin across my body like this and I'm not doing that whole rotation thing so much. So that is the first thing I'm probably going to decide. Do I want to spin long draw, or I'm sorry, woolen long draw, or worsted? So like a short forward, whatever, short backward, what have you. Worsted or woolen. If I'm going to spin something woolen, I'm going to use my Saxony style wheel, which is the shacked flat iron. If I'm not, that is mainly what I spin on that wheel. So otherwise I might use my shacked. Then my other thing is, how much fiddling do I need to do? How fiddly of a yarn am I making? If I need to make a lot of little shifts to my wheel, I'm going to choose my matchless because it has the most customization on it. But if I'm just doing like my default yarn and I'm going to be taking it to spin group, I'm going to grab my Lendrum because it's much lighter weight. It can fold in half. It's really easy for me to carry around, and it's perfect for my default yarn. If I am plying or going on a road trip, I'm probably going to grab my electric wheel, which is my Hansen mini spinner, and that is great for when I want that portability, or the giants on it, the bobbins on it are giant, so I can ply a lot of yarn onto those bobbins. So I do use that mostly for most of my plying is done on there. So there you go. There's some thoughts on which wheel I might use and why. But all wheels have options and things you can tweak on them to make them work for whatever project you're trying to do. So that's just where I'm at personally with what I have available to me and how I make some of those decisions. Question number 4, back to the knitting for all of you non-spinners. I have almost finished my first Harlow hat, which is also my first brioche knit ever. Yay! It is going well, and I am certainly happy with the product I am getting, as it is my first brioche knit. Welcome to the club. However, I am getting a fairly large ladder at the beginning of my round. I'm using magic loop, and I'm an English knitter. I am wondering if there's anything special or extra I should do in order to decrease the laddering when knitting brioche. As an aside, thanks for inspiring me to try brioche, as it is something I swore I would never bother with, but I just love the fabric and it really isn't as hard as I was making it seem. Yay! Welcome to the Brioche Club. So yes, my tip here is when you are in that crown shaping, you have a decrease right there. And I mentioned this in my brioche decrease videos, and I always mention this when I'm teaching brioche, but you have really got to tug that yarn after you do a decrease, because what happens is in brioche, we always have to decrease out 2 stitches instead of just 1, because it's a 2-stitch repeat. So to keep everything in pattern, you decrease 2 stitches at a time. And in hat shaping, a lot of times, like that's a 4-point crown shaping. So you have 2 decreases happening right next to each other. So that's 4 stitches being decreased out in like a little area. And in brioche, we end up kind of jumping over what is 3 stitches to do that decrease, but it's 5 strands of yarn. And so it's really easy to accidentally get too much slack in our yarn, and the decreases can start to look sloppy. So if you look at my brioche decrease tutorials, then you will see how I tug that slack out, and you'll see what a difference it makes. Another thing too is if it's just at the one area, like your beginning of round, you could try just popping a marker there so you know it's still your beginning of a round, but move your needle tips to pretend that a different area is now your beginning of round. Does that make sense? So you want a marker there to signify that that is where your next round begins, but by kind of trying to move your needle tips over to a different point, it can move the stress off of that one join. So like this is really handy for if you're doing sleeves or something like that, and you notice just like that little bit of a ladder. A lot of people, double pointeds tends to have it happen a bit more, where you might see these ladders happening wherever you have to jump the needle tip. So by moving your magic loop sections, because if you think about it, that cord tends to loop out like this, right? And it kind of pops open that little space, and so it can just it can just stretch that area a little bit. So by moving that, you're going to help avoid that popping, stretching happening consistently all in one spot, which can cause the ladder. Another great tip for ladders in general, when you're noticing that in your small circumference knitting, is making sure that you are tugging on the second stitch in from on that new needle. So when you go from one needle to the next, that first stitch is the one we want to tug because we think that's going to close the gap. That can actually exacerbate the issue. Just try to keep even tension on there, but the second stitch in, go ahead and give a tug there. And a lot of times that will actually help the laddering situation more. So I think that's all my tips. But I hope that helps. Is just really, I mean, be careful on what kind of yarn you're using. If you're using a yarn that breaks really easily, tug carefully. But you do want to tug that slack out of those decreases to help keep that nice and tidy. And another thing I will say is when you've blocked something, don't be afraid to kind of go in there and do like a little shimmy to kind of help those stitches settle in, and you can kind of even things out a little bit by doing a little shimmy shake after blocking. All right. I have a question about gauge versus warmth. I recently made a textured sweater knit in a 100% merino worsted weight yarn. I did all the things, made a swatch, blocked it, etc. The sweater fits perfectly. Post blocking, the gauge is spot on, but I've noticed that the sweater isn't that warm. I think the little holes made by the stitches are just big enough for wind to get through. Is this just something that varies pattern to pattern, varies by yarn? The gauge matches the yarn suggested gauge though, so could something have happened during blocking? Would it be dangerous to try to shrink my sweater a tiny bit to tighten the holes? What are some things to look for if you want a very warm sweater? So many great questions in here. Without knowing much about the sweater, my first question is this a textured sweater? Are they more open stitches, or is it just a sweater that's knit at an open gauge? So a decision some designers will make is they are looking for drape. They want that garment to drape beautifully over the body. And so what some designers will do is they will go up a couple needle sizes than what we would usually use for a sweater for that particular thickness of yarn to achieve that drape. And so yes, if the fabric being created is knit at a larger gauge to create that drape, those stitches are going to be more open, even if it's just stockinette. But one thing that I was really thinking about, so knitting at a tighter gauge could help it be warmer. If you are looking just for warmth, it sounds like you achieved a perfect fit and everything else though with this sweater. So I don't think I would try shrinking it, because if you're happy with it and you achieved what you were supposed to in knitting this pattern, I wouldn't mess with it personally. I would layer it. I would throw it over a shirt to help with that warmth. Or I would just use it as a sweater that's not meant to be super warm, which can be lovely, because even in the winter, when you're inside of certain buildings and they're blasting the heat, sometimes you go from being freezing to really hot. So it's not always a bad thing to have one of those in your wardrobe. But if your goal is to get a warm sweater, the number one tip I would tell you is to knit a sweater out of woolen spun yarn. So woolen spun yarn is warmer than worsted spun yarn. So a worsted spun yarn is really smooth. It's what we see when we see a lot of generally just like 100% merino superwash yarns. Like those are generally all a worsted spin. And what happens when you spin worsted is you are compressing the air out of the yarn and smoothing it down, and it creates this beautiful luster and shine and these really round, beautiful, smooth yarns. Woolen spun, all those fibers are jumbled up and they're spun in a way that traps air inside the core. And this is why they're warmer. They're warmer because the air that's trapped in the core of that yarn, even though these sweaters will be significantly lighter in physical weight than your worsted spun, so you would think heavier would be warmer, but these woolen spuns, because they have that air in there, when we wear them, our body warms up the air that is in that yarn, and it turns into this warm insulation. So I have knit my husband both woolen spun sweaters and worsted spun sweaters, and he is always like, oh my gosh, that one sweater is so much warmer than all the rest. And I'm like, it's because it was woolen spun. I actually need to knit him another because he really loves it, especially here when it gets cold in the winter. It's just so cozy. So that's my number one tip to you, is to go find yourself some woolen spun yarn and knit yourself a sweater out of it, because it's going to be so cozy. But I just want to make sure I got all of your other questions. So yes, it can vary pattern to pattern because it depends what the designer is trying to achieve. It absolutely varies by yarn depending on how it was spun, and on gauge because it depends on how you knit it up. But I don't think you did anything wrong. It sounds like you did everything right, and this sweater's goal wasn't one of excessive warmth. It's just so you want a warm sweater, so go get yourself some woolen spun yarn and enjoy it. Woolen spun yarn is what made me fall in love with sweater knitting, because I loved how lightweight it was. It reminded me more of the physical weight of a ready-to-wear sweater, like that I would buy from a shop. And so for me, that was a really helpful transition, because sometimes when we first go from buying sweaters from a store to trying to knit one, we expect them to be the same. and they're not. Sweaters that we buy from a store are usually being machine knit out of yarns that sometimes are the thickness of a thread, and so they're very fine. And when we hand knit, generally we're not going to knit quite so fine. And also because of that, we're using thicker yarn that is heavier, and it creates a heavier, bulkier garment. So when I first knit with wool and spun yarn, I was like, oh my gosh, this feels like something I'd buy from a shop. And so it helped me get more comfortable with then wearing something I'd made myself. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but it was just that when you first start wearing things you make and you feel kind of like you're in a spotlight, even though nobody else cares or even notices. For the individual, it could be like, oh, does everyone know like I made this? Does it hang the right way? Is it, you know? So that was a great transition for me to get really into sweater knitting. So anyways, that wraps that up. Rhinebeck was last weekend. Thank you so much. If you were there and you came and said hello and you joined us for our group photo and chatted on the hill, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being part of that. It is such a big celebration of something that we work really hard towards, really hard for throughout the year. I lost my sentence in the middle of that, but there's a lot that goes into it, and it's just so lovely to meet so many knitters and for people to take their time out of the festival to come say hi and take a group photo. It just really means a lot. So we are working on wrapping all that stuff up. Most everyone besides myself had an extra trip at the end of that one. They're all still getting home, but we will be posting some group photos. I'll definitely share it in my newsletter and in the Ravelry group. I'm sure we'll be posting it in the Facebook group too, hopefully on Instagram, and we'll be picking the winners, and all of that stuff is coming. We're just waiting for everyone to get home. Next weekend, I will be at Sacred Sheep in Portland, Oregon. So if you are attending that, I hope to see you there. I'm doing a couple live versions of this there, and I'll also do a little meet and greet during the day. So you can find information on the website. I do think tickets are sold out. I don't know if they're doing any day of ticket sales, so I can't speak to that, so I won't. But if you are going, I hope to see you there. And that is my last trip of 2023. And then I am so ready to be home and cozy with my family and getting back to my wheels and my loom and my needles and holiday baking and just cozy times. I'm ready for the cozy times with the family. So anyways, thank you so much. Thanks for your patience on getting this video out this week. I just want to send a lot of love to everyone in Maine and everyone everywhere. You know, there's been, words fail me. There's been a lot of hard things out there, and I hope that this brings a little bit of happy back to your day. And thanks for bringing some happy to my day and watching and asking me your questions, and I hope to see you back here next week. And last bit, I have a new pattern coming Tuesday, and with it is a new knit along. It is a knit along we do every year. It's the Insta Friends knit along. So I'm so excited to bring you that pattern. It's knit out of La Bien-Aimée yarns, and I will be showing it all to you on Tuesday. If you're not signed up for my newsletter, make sure you sign up now, because you get a special discount on my new patterns when you're a newsletter subscriber. All right, I'm gonna end this here. I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.